Yeah, thank you very much for this very kind introduction. First of all, I'm very honored to be here in Breasted Hall, and I'm very honored to got this position as a postdoctoral fellow. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very amazed that a topic on chronology and collapse attracts so many people. I'm usually not used to that. When I speak at conferences, we get, I don't know, 20 people perhaps, something like this. So I'm really very honored to be here, and I'm very honored to stand here today in Breasted Hall, because when I first got interested in ancient Egypt and the ancient Near East and so on, when I was still in high school, I went to the local library, to the local public library at the outskirts of Vienna, and just took the first book that I found on ancient Egypt. And well, the author started with a B, and I guess you know which book I read. It was this one, the German translation of James Henry Breasted's Geschichte Ägyptens, translated by, I mean, this was just an, I don't know, 1970s, 1980s reprint that I found at the local library. And later on, when I worked in Tel El Dabba, and once we traveled for the weekend to Cairo, in a local bookstore, I found an original 1910 translation of this book, James Henry Breasted's Geschichte Ägyptens, in a second-hand bookstore in Cairo, and of course I had to buy this thing. And when I opened this book, I saw this. It belonged to the famous German Egyptologist Kurt Sethe. And then, of course, I had to spend, I think I spent a month's salary just to buy this book. And now I'm very happy to, I don't know, not just because Breasted was the first book I read on ancient Egypt, but that I found this book that actually belonged to this famous German Egyptologist, and now standing in Breasted Hall is really a great thing. Now, I don't know if this works if I move here. Can you still hear me? Yeah. What I would like to present today is part of an ongoing research project which mainly deals with chronology of the early Bronze Age, Middle Bronze Age, and Late Bronze Age. And today I would like to present you some evidence for dating the collapses that happened in the late 3rd millennium ancient Near East, from Egypt, the end of the Old Kingdom, to the Syro-Mesopotamian city-states, the first urbanized structures, down to Mesopotamia, the end of the Akkadian Empire. And I'd like to structure my talk into 4 different parts. So in the beginning I try to give you a short overview on the ancient Near East in the late 3rd millennium BC, on transformation and collapses, what happens at that time in the ancient Near East. Afterwards, we will take a look on what I would call chronologies of collapse. We will review radiocarbon evidence for the collapse of the first cities of the southern and central Levant. This would really be the main topic of my talk today. And afterwards, we will review other radiocarbon evidence for the collapse of the Akkad Empire and of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. And then maybe I hope to present some preliminary conclusions. So we start with the Eastern Mediterranean, the ancient Near East, and Egypt in the late 3rd millennium, where we have in Upper Mesopotamia, we have the Akkad Empire emerging in the late 3rd millennium BC. We have on the Lebanese coast, this is a small picture of Tel Arqa, excavated by Jean-Paul Talman from Paris. We have fortified early Bronze Age cities, the first cities that we know of in this region. Or in the southern Levant, in Jordan, this is a picture of Khirbet el-Batrawi, excavated by Lorenzo Nigro of the University of Rome, La Sapienza. And finally, throughout the 3rd millennium, we have Old Kingdom Egypt, really the pyramid age of Old Kingdom Egypt. This is, of course, the Khafre pyramid. I just took it because it's much earlier than the late 3rd millennium, of course, but just to give you an impression. And sometime in the late 3rd millennium, all these civilizations, the Akkad Empire, the first cities, and the Egyptian Old Kingdom, they just disappeared for whatever reason. And especially in especially in Upper Mesopotamia, in the Chabur region. This is striking because here we have a map, so that this would be the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Chabur, and so on. And Professor Harvey Weiss from Yale University, who excavates in Tel El, they made a regional survey here, just to check sites that were occupied, how many hectares were occupied. Just to give you an impression, here's the Chabur, and this is a picture of Tel El, the site Harvey Weiss is excavating. And just to give you an impression of this sort of collapse that happened in the late third millennium in Upper Mesopotamia, these are the hectares that were occupied during two periods, the so-called Leland II-B period, which would be the end of the Akkad rule in Upper Mesopotamia, and the so-called Leland II-C period, which would be the post-Akkad time, the post-Akkad period in this region. And as you can see, in the Akkad period, the amount of occupied hectares is somewhere around 400 hectares, and afterwards it drops massively. It drops down to 70 hectares, and also the total amount of occupied settlements drops from 55 to 18 from the Akkad occupation to the post-Akkad period. So something happened there. The Akkadians left, society collapsed, and so on. And you can also see it here, where you get the occupied hectares in this survey that they checked from the late Uruk period down to the Chabur. So you have here the Leland II-B phase, the Akkadian phase. Afterwards, it drops massively to the post-Akkadian settlement. And afterwards, you get an hiatus. The region is virtually deserted. And only in the beginning of the second millennium, people came back and settled the region. And we have nothing as drastic as in Upper Mesopotamia, but we have a similar thing in Egypt, where we have the Old Kingdom, and afterwards the Old Kingdom collapses. We have the first intermediate period. We have these so-called famine texts of autobiographies in the first intermediate period in Egypt. For instance, the one from Antifi from his tomb in Mu'alla, where he claims that, where he tells us that all of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger, and everybody had come to eating his children, and so everybody is starving and so on. And but Antifi, of course, he was able to send grain and to help the people and so on. There's of course a discussion going on if you really can take these texts literally. But if I mean, we know that central authority of the Old Kingdom collapsed at a certain point of time, and we know that we have this famine text in the first intermediate period. It could also just be a topos, that people like to claim, okay, I'm helping my neighbors and so on and so on. But if there was any, I don't know, big famine going on, we could maybe envision this famine something like this. This is of course an earlier scene, just to see these starving people. This is a scene from the causeway of Unis pyramid of the late 5th dynasty. But nevertheless, also in Egypt there was something going on. And actually it is possible to prove that at the end of the Old Kingdom, that Nile flood, which is of course needed to grow crops in Egypt, that Nile flood failed. So especially you can deduce this from strontium isotopic analysis. We know that at the end of the Old Kingdom there was some kind of drought. Nile floods were failing. The question is if these failing Nile floods really triggered the downfall of the Egyptian Old Kingdom, or, I don't know, contributed to the downfall of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. Because, as you can see, Nile floods were relatively low throughout the Old Kingdom and just got up again in the Middle and New Kingdom. So if Egypt really suffered such a massive collapse and downfall and decline as Upper Mesopotamia is still discussed. Now, what we will look upon in the coming hour also is especially the southern and central Levant. Especially this area, so modern-day Israel, the Palestine Authority, and Jordan, so basically Western Jordan and Lebanon. And during the late third millennium, mid to late third millennium, we have this thriving early Bronze Age cities, fortified cities with city walls and huge gates and everything. This is an example from the German Jordanian excavations of Khirbet es-Serakun, located in northwestern Jordan. Or for instance, this picture from Khirbet el-Batrawi in the Wadi al-Sarka, also in western Jordan, with this huge city wall and houses, temples and so on in the city. This example is from Tel Yamut, around here, excavated by Pierre de Mirochecci from France. Or for instance, we saw this picture in the beginning, a picture from Tel Arqa in Lebanon. So we have the Akkad Empire in Upper Mesopotamia, we have the Old Kingdom, and afterwards the first intermediate period in Egypt. And at the same time, more or less, mid to late third millennium BC, we have these big fortified early cities in the southern Levant that at some point just collapsed. Now, these are two maps of Israel, Palestine, and Western Jordan, which compare the early Bronze Age 2-3 settlements with the so-called intermediate Bronze Age or early Bronze Age 4. So to the left, you see the fortified settlements during this high time of the first urbanization. Then we have a break. All these fortified settlements, all these cities were abandoned. Some were destroyed, and later on in the intermediate Bronze Age, sometimes also called early Bronze Age 4, people got back to nomadism, semi-nomadism, pastoralism, and so on, lived in small, unfortified villages. So again, society as we knew it from early Bronze Age 3 and 2 collapsed, and something new came. And Pierre de Mirochecci published a few years ago this very nice graph that shows it very well. In the late Chalcolithic and beginning early Bronze Age, we have this agro-pastoral society. Afterwards, we see the rise of the first urbanization in the southern Levant. We have the highly fortified and urbanized settlements in early Bronze Age 2 and 3, the so-called archaic city-states. Afterwards, we get this collapse in the late third millennium. People returned, we have a ruralization, pastoralization, and so on during the intermediate Bronze Age. And afterwards, people rise again, get settled, urbanized, and develop the urbanized Middle Bronze Age, the so-called second phase of urbanization. Now, we have this Akkad Empire, our city-states, and Egypt. And of course, people were thinking what really caused the collapse of our city-states in the southern Levant and in the central Levant. And a few scholars thought that we know that Egypt had active commercial relationships primarily with the central Levant. They got timber there, they traveled to Byblos and so on. This, for instance, is an autobiography of an high Egyptian official from the 5th or 6th dynasty, called Ini, and we know from his autobiography that he went several times to Lebanon. They traded, they brought back ships, timber to build ships and so on. And people thought that maybe when trade, also the Egyptian trade with the Levant, got to an end at the late third millennium when the Egyptian Old Kingdom collapsed, maybe this collapse of the Egyptian Old Kingdom and the disruption of the trade might also have caused the end of the first cities and the collapse of the society as we knew it in the southern Levant. Other people argued that maybe military expeditions from Egypt, for instance, by this guy, also a high Egyptian official called Weni, military expeditions to the southern Levant might have contributed to the downfall of the first cities of the southern Levant, because this Veni guy claimed in his autobiography that he hacked up the land of the so-called Heriosha. The Heriosha literally means people who are upon the sand, and the land of the Heriosha is usually located in the southern Levant, where you have the dunes and so on. And he claims that he had thrown down its enclosures and had cut down its fig trees and vines, and he had cast fire into all its dwellings and so on. And people were reading, especially this thrown down of its enclosures and so on, people were thinking, of course, of these highly fortified settlements we have in the southern Levant. And people were arguing, yeah, maybe the Egyptian military expeditions in the 6th dynasty might have contributed to the end of the city-states as we knew it from the early Bronze II and III period. Now, there's also the theory, of course, of climate change. This is especially advocated by Professor Harvey Weiss from Yale University, who also excavates Tel El and made this northern Mesopotamia survey. We know from different climate proxy data that around 2200 BC, that there was a massive cooling and aridification in all over the world. We have this from Greenland ice cores to, we see it at Lake Van, the sea level of the Dead Sea drops and so on. And he argued basically that, yeah, this is called the 4.2 Ka BP event, just to give you this. He argues that this 4.2 Ka BP, as BP means before present, and K is for kilo year, so to say, that this 4.2 Ka BP event, this rapid climate change, triggered not only the downfall of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, but also the end of the Old Kingdom civilization in Egypt, civilizations in the Indus Valley, in Greece, Crete, and also our early city-states in early Bronze Age 3 Palestine. And indeed, this is a graph. This shows the average temperature as derived from Greenland ice cores. And indeed, at that period between 2200 and 3900, you have a massive drop in the temperature all over the northern hemisphere. And by the way, later on, you also have a massive drop, which is roughly contemporary with the end of the late Bronze Age. So what we know from climate data, that around 2200 something happened. So climate got worse, it got cooler, it got drier, and the theory is that this change in this climate change triggered the downfall of the Akkad Empire, the first city-states, and the Old Kingdom. This is the chronology as we have it for the moment. So down here we have the Egyptian chronology with the Egyptian Old Kingdom, the dynasties 3 to 6, the pyramid age, so to say, of Egypt. Up here we have the development of the early Bronze Age Palestine with the big cities in early Bronze Age 3. Then we have the so-called intermediate Bronze Age or early Bronze Age 4. The expedition of Veni and the military expeditions would have happened roughly at that time. And this climatic event here in yellow would happen a little bit later. So it looks like that it's all more or less at the same time, the downfall of the Old Kingdom and also the onset of the intermediate Bronze Age. Now we thought we would like to check that. And here I have to say a few words, of course, about radiocarbon dating, because without radiocarbon dating I wouldn't stand here. And it's the second thing why I'm very honored to be in Chicago, because radiocarbon dating was actually invented at the University of Chicago in the late 1940s. So what I will show you now is basically results from the project that I work on. And I have to thank all these institutions down here. So I started with a grant from the Austrian Academy of Sciences, then moved to the German Archaeological Institute, got money from them and from the Fritz Thyssen Foundation. And later we began a cooperation with the University of California, Los Angeles, and most of our dates were run at the University of Oxford, and I'm very grateful to all these institutes that they spent a considerable amount of money, and I hope that our data, it looks fine. Also, I'm very pleased with our data. Now, radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon dating was invented or developed by a guy called Willard Frank Libby, actually from Colorado. He did his PhD in 1933. He got his PhD in chemistry from Berkeley. Afterwards, he worked during the war at the Manhattan Project, and after the war joined the University of Chicago. And in 1948, he developed the radiocarbon dating technique, and in 1960 was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. So he's one of the many Nobel laureates you have at the University of Chicago. And this is actually his publication where he proved that the radiocarbon method is really working. So it was published in Science, of course, in 1949, yes. And this is the graph he published. This is the graph that proved that the method of radiocarbon dating really was working. So this curve is the radiocarbon activity, and these objects he tested, and they fit perfectly to the calculated curve based on the known half-life of radiocarbon. And actually 3 of these objects came from Chicago, 2 from the Oriental Institute Museum, and 1 from the Chicago Field Museum. So all this chronological research and radiocarbon dating is somehow connected to this place. I don't know why. Now, before I go to the data, I just would like to spend a couple of slides to explain how this method works, because it's crucial for what I'm presenting. So, carbon, we have basically 3 isotopes for carbon. We have C12, which is stable, we have C13, which is also stable, and then we have a tiny amount of C14, which is radioactive and decays according to the known half-life of 5,700 something years, which basically means from a certain amount of carbon after 5,730 years, only half of that amount is left, the other half has decayed. And carbon-14 is produced in the upper atmosphere, so nitrogen-14 captures a neutron from cosmic radiation, turns to carbon-14, and afterwards all living beings, human, animals, plants, and so on, take up carbon through food and photosynthesis and so on. And after human beings, animals, plants, and so on dies, we cease to take up carbon, and so carbon-14, the radioactive isotope of carbon, decays, and the less carbon-14 is present in an organic object, the older it is. So this is the basic principle. And what we were basically doing, we went to sites where we wanted to check the chronology and so on. For instance, here we went to Tel Kabri in northern Israel. This is Eric Klein from George Washington University. This is my colleague Mechtilda Turner from the German Archaeological Institute. We check the samples they have, we pack them up, we send them to our botanist Simone Riel in Tübingen. She identifies it, and afterwards, based on the context, of course it has to be a sealed context, and we concentrate usually on seeds because they are single year plants. We put it into a machine that looks like that. This is the 3.5 megavolt tandem accelerator of the Vienna Environmental Research Accelerator, which looks like this. I'm not going to explain this, but just to give you, just to give you an impression, basically what we do is we burn the seeds, so we carbonize them. Afterwards, these tiny little pieces of carbon are stuck into a target wheel, and we shoot cesium negative ions on them. They get accelerated through this tandem accelerator, and afterwards it's basically a spectrometer. And afterwards we can we detect the amount of C12, C13, and C14. And then eventually, most of the time we get a bill. We have to pay like $500 to get this, which is a lab coat and a date. But this is not the end of the story. You have to calibrate the date because the amount of C14 is not stable throughout times, and we have to calibrate it according to the radiocarbon calibration curve. And in the end, you come down to something like this, which is basically a probability distribution on the timeline. So this is a very different concept from what we usually deal in archaeology. In archaeology, when we excavate and we have a context, I don't know, a pottery type, a shirt, is either it's there or it is not. But here we can just say with a probability of 95.4%, the date falls between 1527 and 1410. So this is a different approach. So after this excursion, we come back to our collapsing city-states. So the first early Bronze Age city we got samples from was Khirbet el-Batrawi, located in the Wadi as-Sarqa in western Jordan. Here are some pictures, the city wall. So we have an early Bronze Age city that collapsed or was disbanded left in the end of the early Bronze Age 3, the end of the urbanized period. Excavation by Lorenzo Nigro from La Sapienza in Rome. So far we got 14 short-lived samples from a perfect context. So it was a pithos full of charred grain from the destruction horizon. So far we don't have any samples from earlier phases or later phases. There's a tiny little early Bronze Age 4 squatter occupation afterwards. And these samples were run by the Vienna Environmental Research Accelerator in Vienna when I was still working at the Austrian Academy. So these are just some pictures of the charred grain and so on. And then we get our probability distributions. Now, we know what we expected was that the end of early Bronze Age 3 would fall to roughly 2,300, give or take a few decades. Now, what we have here, all our dates do not extend beyond 2,600, so are at least 300 years earlier than we had expected. And it's unfortunate that we have these huge error bars here. So as you can see, these dates extend from, 2,800 to 2,600, and this is due to the shape of the radiocarbon calibration curve at that point in time. We just can say that this city, Khirbet el-Batrawi, the end of the urbanized phase of Khirbet el-Batrawi, falls somewhere between 2,800 and 2,600. So I know this is not very precise, and it's way earlier than we expected. So what we did, we went to a second site, and this was Khirbet es-Serakun, also located in northwestern Jordan. And also because we just had a single context in Khirbet el-Batrawi, it was just one jar full of charred grain. We wanted at least to have several contexts within a single city. Now, Khirbet es-Serakun is an excavation that was conducted in the 80s and early 90s by the University of Tübingen and the Yarmouk University of Irbid. And already at that time, they took 16 samples, unfortunately mostly charcoal samples, which have an inbuilt age because basically you date tree rings and you don't know how many years elapsed between this tree ring and the bark when the tree was felled and so on. So we concentrated on new samples just from short-lived seeds, so single-year seeds, and all samples that we tested came from the main settlement phase, which did not extend to the intermediate Bronze Age. So again, a city, a fortified city, which was left at the end of the urbanized phase. Again, the picture from the excavation. And here are the two excavation areas. And at that time, we had several contexts to choose from. So we run the dates. So these are in green, we have the new dates that we run within our project, and the other dates are mostly charcoal dates that were run previously in Heidelberg, Berlin, and Kiel, I think. And as you can see, again, most dates are way too early compared to what we expected. Most dates fall to between 3,100 to 2,900, and again, only a few dates are later, but they don't go beyond this 2600 line. So again, the latest evidence we have for early Bronze 3 at the site of Khirbet el-Batrawi and at the site of Khirbet es-Serakun is like 300 years earlier than we had expected. And we have no indication up to now that early Bronze 3 lasted until 2300 or 2200 when this climate change was happening. Now, so far we just had dates from the urbanized period, from early Bronze 2 and early Bronze 3, and we got very interested to see some early Bronze 4 dates, of course, to see where they would fall on the absolute timeline. And we were very fortunate to come into contact with Hermann Gens from the American University of Beirut, who excavates Tel Fadaous Kfarabida in Lebanon. So here's a map of the excavation. This is the rest of the tell. Unfortunately, they built a road and bulldozed most of the tell, but then they found that they were actually bulldozing an early Bronze Age city, or a small city, and they stopped, and Hermann started his rescue excavations that lasted, I think, until, a year ago or so. And this site is very important because here, for the first time, we have a complete stratigraphy. This site ranges from the early Bronze Age, actually from the Chalcolithic period down to the Middle Bronze Age. We have over 30 short-lived samples from this site, from all phases, mostly olive pits and charred seeds, so no wood, only short-lived material. And we involved 3 different laboratories just to be sure that there's no laboratory offset. So we run them in Kiel, in Vienna, and in Oxford. Yeah, this is just to give you not only graphs, but also some pictures. Now, these are the results for our sequence for Tel Fadaous in Lebanon. And this would be the stratigraphy. So we have 6 phases. And we start with the Chalcolithic, then we have an hiatus of an unknown time. Then we have the early Bronze 1, 2, 3, and 4, or so-called intermediate Bronze Age, again in hiatus, and then comes the Middle Bronze Age. And what we are really interested in is to get this transition, the transition from early Bronze Age 3 to early Bronze Age 4, which is at the same time the end of the urbanized phase of the early Bronze Age in the Levant. So here the Haiti, so to say, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. And now this looks, as you have seen before, we get these error bars because of the flatness of the radiocarbon calibration curve. So we had to apply something different. I'm not going to explain this in detail. This is called the so-called Bayesian probability approach, which is actually a very cool thing, and if anybody's interested afterwards, I can talk your ear off. Basically, what this Bayesian probability approach does is we have measurements of radiocarbon samples, and we can combine them with other information we have. So like phases from phase A, samples from phase A have to be earlier than samples from phase B. And this you can combine in a mathematical model. You use the prior information, the information about the sequence of the samples you have before you even measure the samples, which is based on stratigraphy, so on archaeological observation. You have the measurements, what you get from the lab, and afterwards you combine this thing in this model. It runs for, I don't know, some hours, and afterwards what you get is the so-called the posterior probability, which is nothing else than more precise dates, more precise measurements on the basis that our prior assumptions the stratigraphy of the site is correct. And I just have to show this slide because I like the color so much. You have to think of, this would be the measurements. So this is all done in mathematical space. On the left-hand side, you have the measurements, the single measurements of the samples. And then you have to transform your archaeological observation in a mathematical function, which is done here, which is just based on two samples. And they say sample 1 has to be older than sample 2. That's why on the one hand side, probability is high. On the other hand side, probability is low. These two functions are combined, and then you get the posterior probability. So this is how it works. It's only possible to show it with two samples and then prior probability, because if you have 3 samples, it gets 4-dimensional. If you have 15 samples, it gets 16-dimensional, and so on. Now, and we have 30 samples. Now, what we assumed was, we assumed that all samples are representative of their respective find contexts. So all samples from phase 3 really belong to phase 3 and have to be older than all samples from phase 4, and so on. And I'm not talking about outlier analysis, that if somebody's interested, we can do this later on. But so we built this model, we run this model, and then we got this. This is the outcome. This is the outcome of our Bayesian probability approach. And we were interested in the end of the first cities, the transition from phase 4 to phase 5, and we get a very precise date for this. So with this probability approach and with the measurements we have, we are able to date the transition from the urbanized phase at Tel Fadaous. So basically the collapse of the first cities in Tel Fadaous, the urbanized phase in Tel Fadaous, between 2557 to 2500. So in 50 years, we are able, if we spend enough money, we are able to get this, such a precision, and this is really amazing, because in this phase, we also have radiocarbon dates for the early Bronze Age 4, for the pastoral phase. Now again, we get consistent evidence that the end of the first cities happened way earlier than we had imagined. And we were very happy that Elisabetta Boaretto and Johanna Regev of the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, they more or less, we didn't know that, were doing the same research. And for the site of Tel Yarmout, excavated by Pierre de Mirochecci, they got very similar results. They published it in 2 papers in Radiocarbon, and they concluded, and they also reviewed older C14 dates from Israel, and they concluded that the transition from early Bronze 3 to 4, so the end of the first cities, happened around 2500, at the latest 2450, but possibly before 2500. So again, this is a consistent pattern, and this, changes more or less everything. Now, of course, especially in how should I say, in the Middle Bronze Age, and where I come from, there's a big discussion if really radiocarbon dating really works all over the place, if there are any unknown offsets and so on. And we checked, also after we got these results, of course, we checked also the dates for the collapse of the Akkad Empire. Also Harvey Weiss did that and published that afterwards. And the colleagues in Oxford also run a huge project on testing the Egyptian historical chronology if scientific dates turn out to be the same dates as the dates we have from historical sources. Now, for Tel Elan, which is supposed also to end at the same time as the cities of the southern Levant, so we thought the cities in the southern Levant ended about 2300, 2200. They turned out to be much older. So we'll see what happens at Tel Elan. So again, excavation by Harvey Weiss, and we have these 2 phases which are of interest to us, the Akkad period, Tel Elan 2b, and Tel Elan 2c, the post-Akkad period. And Harvey Weiss sent off 93 samples, which is a huge amount, to the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and Stuart Manning from Cornell University built the model and ran it several times to get a precise date. And yeah, again, a picture of Tel Elan and some pictures of the excavation. And this is what Sturt Manning and Harvey Weiss got for the end of the Akkad period at Tel Elan. So for the end of 2b, which is the Akkad period, falls to 20 to 50, and the end of the post-Akkad period, where we had the huge collapse and afterwards the hiatus, falls exactly more or less to 2200. So this is 300 years later than the collapse of our first cities in the central and southern Levant. And obviously, these two collapses are in no way connected. And also for Egypt, as I said, the colleagues in Oxford, they had a huge project that was published 2010 in Science, where they tested with over 200 new radiocarbon dates, high precision radiocarbon dates, the accuracy of our historical dates for ancient Egypt. So the theory was that Akkad Empire, first cities of the southern Levant, and Old Kingdom Egypt collapsed more or less at the same point of time. The historical dates we have for the end of the Old Kingdom are roughly 2200, give or take some decades. And then we had this Oxford project where they based the absolute dates on 200 new measurements, and again they did this Bayesian probability approach to get more precise dates. And what they used as prior information, so as information that we have before we apply the measurements to it, was basically the sequence of the kings and what we know about the reign lengths of the kings, of course with an additional error. And they came down with an outcome with results that looks like this. Now what we have here on the left-hand side in the column are the separate kings. The gray shaded areas are the calculated first years of the respective kings, and in red is the usual chronology after Kenneth Kitchen, and in blue and in green other chronologies. And as you can see, the Egyptian historical dates fit in general perfectly to the radiocarbon dates. So we cannot argue with any kind of systematic radiocarbon offset. There's only one difference at the end of the Egyptian Old Kingdom, which is slightly higher than expected. And here, the start for the first intermediate period, you see the date that, the historical date is slightly younger, about 80 years difference than we have from the radiocarbon measurements. And based on this model, the beginning, so to say, the collapse of the Old Kingdom in Egypt happened somewhere between 2240 and 2186 BC. Now, and that date fit perfectly to the end of the Akkad Empire in Upper Mesopotamia. Could be coincidence, of course, but if you compare the dates, the probability distributions on the timeline, 2240 to I don't know, 2186, and here we have 2253 to 2156. It's not a complete match, but they are very similar. Could be coincidence, of course, but we have to acknowledge that at least for one reason or another, the end of the Akkad Empire and the end of the Old Kingdom happened exactly at that time when this rapid climate change happened in the ancient Near East. Now, again, our dates are way earlier. Our dates for Tel Fadaus, the end of early Bronze III, and the city-states, somewhere between, so the youngest dates we got from Tirb el-Batrawi and Serakun and so on. The latest possibility was 2600. So anywhere between 2600 and 2500, according to our evidence, ended the urbanized phase, the first cities in the southern Levant. And if you compare our radiocarbon dates to the radiocarbon dates from Egypt, they would fall here. They would be contemporary with the 4th dynasty, basically. So when the Egyptians were building their great pyramids, the city-states of the southern Levant were already gone, or at least collapsing. Now, some very preliminary conclusions. This was our chronological scheme until we started this dating project. And now it looks like we have to revise it. The early Bronze Age 4, the intermediate Bronze Age, when there were no cities and people were living in unfortified villages and so on, started much earlier. When Veni traveled to the southern Levant, there were no cities there. They were all abandoned. They were all gone, more or less. And also this transition is in no way connected to this climate change. So far we don't know what really caused this downfall of the first cities of Palestine, of the southern Levant. But we can say it's not climate induced. And we can also say, and then of course we have to check if the archaeology fits to such an move. If we want to move chronological phases, we have to check if there are any imports that wouldn't allow that. And there's this very valuable book by Australian colleague Karen Sovada on Egypt in the Eastern Mediterranean in the early Bronze Age, and she collected all Egyptian imports from early Bronze Age 3 and 2 context in the southern Levant, so basically the time of the first cities, and she came up with this list. So it's much too small to read, of course, but you have to believe me. The imports from Egypt, they cease in the 4th dynasty, exactly when we would expect that they cease based on our radiocarbon dates. There are just 2 or 3 instances where a 5th dynasty parallel would be possible, like this jar or this fragment, but for these pieces you can also find perfect 4th or 3rd dynasty parallels. So based on archaeology, there's no need to assume that the urban cities of the southern Levant lasted until the end of the Old Kingdom in Egypt. Now, we noted that this Veni guy was traveling to the southern Levant, or at least he claimed that he was traveling to the southern Levant, destroying cities and so on. And now we know at the time when he was traveling there in the 6th dynasty, there were no cities there. So either he just claimed that he destroyed these cities, or maybe he never went there. Could also be a possibility, of course. On the other hand, this Ini guy, this official who traded with Byblos and so on, we know from his autobiography, he explicitly says that he went to Lebanon and he went to Byblos and he brought Byblos ships, and then again he went to Byblos. So he specifically claims, at least he mentions site names and so on. But still, the end of the trade at the end of the Old Kingdom did not affect the first cities of the southern Levant, because again, at that time they were already gone. So what would be the conclusions? So we know now that the date of the collapse of the Akkad Empire in Upper Mesopotamia is based on radiocarbon dating in agreement with this rapid climate change around 2200 BC. We also know, based on radiocarbon data, that the end of the Old Kingdom and the beginning of the first intermediate period in Egypt is in agreement with the climatic event around 2200 BC. And we know, so Talilan and so on, that the chronology of the northern Levant and the traditional chronological synchronisms with Egypt are apparently correct. Our problem is the southern Levant. And the collapse, obviously, of the first cities in the southern Levant, radiocarbon dated consistently, fall to somewhere between 2600 and 2500. This collapse is not related to any climatic event that we know of. It is not related to trade disruptions in the Egyptian Old Kingdom. And finally, it's also not related to any alleged military campaigns during the Old Kingdom. So, based on this new data, I guess we have to start over. And so far, I don't have an answer. And I would like, because I have no answer, I would like to quote with a quote from Bertolt Brecht, which says, a general translation in English: Wir stehen selbst enttäuscht und sind betroffen, den Vorhang zu und alle Fragen offen. Thank you very much.